I want to see another case study to explore other issues that our client may come across. Another case study may change in the sense that now I'm married again to a woman, and then I have two children. In this case study, I'm married to a woman with two children. One is 18 years old. This is like a teenager, and she's about to enroll into university. And then I have a young child who is also 8 years old. You see the big difference in terms of age. So there are different considerations for my two children when I want to move them to study in the UK. How can you help?
Yeah, I think it's looking at if you start taking them separately. So your 18-year-old daughter would be applying for a Tier 4 general visa to come to the UK as a student. The university that she's chosen and applied to would issue her with a certificate for acceptance of studies. A bit like a work permit, if you like, it's a study permit. And then it's a visa application, and she will be coming in then to study that particular course at that university. If she's not keen on studying, she's 18 and just fancies seeing a little bit of the UK, there is another option. She could come under what's called the Tier 5 Youth Mobility, which is open to Hong Kong SAR passport holders and also BNOs. And that's a right to come here for 2 years, work for any employer, any job. So we do sometimes see 18-year-olds coming over in that category, and then maybe coming back as a student, maybe a little bit later on, or even the other way around. So the student category, Tier 4 student, would allow her to study a degree course. She could even work part-time while she was studying, up to 20 hours a week and during vacation. It's quite an expensive route because you've got to show that you've got the money to pay for the student fees at the university, and also that there's enough money to live on as a student while studying. And that's done as a purely mathematical calculation. If you're studying in London, the amount is £1,265 per month to study, up to a maximum of 9 months. So you can see that with the student fees, it does add up quite quickly in terms of the amount of cash that has to be available for this kind of application. But it's a nice category, and we don't have it at the moment, but coming on stream in the summer next year, anybody who completes a degree level course in the UK will be able to then apply for a right to work in the UK for a further period of 2 years. And that again will be any employer, any job. So it's a really attractive option to come and study for 3 years and then work for another couple of years beyond that. It might be that that's then enough time to spend in the UK, or it might be that then the student feels really at home here and might want to move into another immigration application from there. So there's a really nice immigration path. The problem with the student route is it doesn't ever lead to an indefinite right to stay in the UK in its own right, but it's whether you can then find a foothold with an employer to move into a path that does lead to a right to stay in the UK long term, if that's important. But if it's not important, a UK degree is a really valuable asset to take off to anywhere in the world.
I guess I will let them decide after they graduate.
And then thinking about your 8-year-old, completely different again, because obviously there are different issues there. It's fine to send an 18-year-old over to go to university on her own, but your 8-year-old is going to need some support. Now, it might be that you send them, he would be coming over on a Tier 4 child visa, slightly different criteria. But again, applying to a school, the school would issue a certificate for acceptance of studies, a study permit, and he'd apply for a visa to come. If it was a boarding school, you just need to show that you've got enough money to pay for the boarding school fees for the year of study. If it's not a boarding school, you've got a couple of options. You can have a carer, so it might be that you have a brother or a sister, an aunt or an uncle, a cousin in the UK that your son would stay with, in which case you need to show that that person will be there to support him and that there's enough money. And again, it's worked out on a mathematical calculation, £570 per month, up to a maximum of 9 months to show that you've got that income, or you've got those assets to support your son. So there's a nice little glitch in the UK immigration rules that if you have a child under the age of 12, you're allowed to apply for a visa as a parent of a child at school. And that would give you the right to come almost like an extended visitor and live with your son whilst he was studying in the UK. There's no right to work, there's no long-term right to stay in the UK, but it might get your son to the point at which he's more confident to go to a boarding school if age is too young.
So my wife can move there and look after my son and be a tai-tai there?
Exactly, yes. I did say that the student category doesn't ever lead to an indefinite right to live in the UK, and it's true it doesn't. But we do have, separate to that, what's called the long residence permission. So if you manage to clock up 10 years of being a student, living in the UK 10 years, studying here for 10 years, then your son, by the time he finishes his A-levels, might be eligible to apply for an indefinite right to stay in the UK. So generally the student route isn't a direct path into a permanent right to stay, but if you can manage to get 10 years as a student, which an 8-year-old would do before he finished his main schooling, then that option would be open.
It seems like it will going to be a very, very long plan. And should I be only buying a place for them to live, especially if my wife is going to move there as well?
Yeah, I was just going to touch on sort of more generally. You might assume on the facts as presented that actually UK tax isn't quite so much of a relevance, but it's worth bearing in mind on a number of different levels. Broadly, students and children in full-time education are still within the scope of the statutory residence test for UK residence purposes, but it's less of it may well be less of a consideration for them, given we're dealing with an 8-year-old and an 18-year-old in terms of their capacities for income generating and bringing offshore funds in. It's not quite the same considerations as we might be dealing with if we were talking about the parents. If we've got a situation where mother is going to come and spend time in the UK to, at least support the 8-year-old in education, then we need to be sort of alive to the fact that we don't want her to inadvertently become UK resident through her visits to the UK. And there are some specific rules around that, where broadly under the statutory residence test, there's 3 categories. You're either resident or non-resident. It's very black and white based on day count. Where there's a degree of a grey area, we have a sufficient ties test. The idea being the more ties you have to the UK, the less time you can spend here without being treated as UK resident. And children under the age of 18, there's a family tie, and children under the age of 18 are ignored for the purposes of that sufficient ties test, primarily where they're only in the UK for the purposes of attending school. And the parent themselves is spending less than 61 days here themselves to provide that supporting role. If there's a suggestion that the child stays here during half terms and holidays, that may well create a tie to the UK that mother needs to be aware of. So again, another message is that don't assume that UK tax isn't irrelevant here, because it is. The sort of the silver lining to this cloud may well be, again, this stamp duty holiday that we were talking about. If mum and dad are thinking of buying a property for the daughter who's going to university, which is not uncommon and something we see all the time, there's 2 issues to consider. If mum and dad purchase the property, although it's an additional property for them if we assume they already have property in Hong Kong or elsewhere in the world, they're not going to be paying the lowest amount of stamp duty. But the way that the new rules operate, this temporary window of opportunity, they will be able to take advantage of a lower rate than they might have otherwise have done. The other point to bear in mind is if they structure this purchase correctly, and the daughter buys the property, she may well be able to access the 0% stamp duty land tax rate on the purchase if she's buying the property. And that's done through ensuring that the monies are gifted by parents to daughter offshore for inheritance tax purposes and brought to the UK in her name. So again, there's some planning to be done to potentially save some significant tax. So again, it's just being aware of the options available to them.